Hello, the topic of today's video is social influence. Social influence is changes in a person's behavior induced by the presence of actions of others. And that can happen by mere presence, conformity, obedience, or coercion. What behavior that you would typically engage in while in the room you would alter if somebody entered the room? Potentially picking your nose, for example. You might do that if you're alone, but you probably might stop doing that if somebody entered the room. That's the effect of the mere presence effect. So the tendency of people to change their behavior just because of the presence of other people. And mere presence can lead to social facilitation, which is the tendency to perform better when in the presence of others. But it's only when you are confident in your ability. So for example, if you're good in playing pool and you know it, you will actually perform better if there are others present compared to when you're alone. However, if you're not so good at something, say, I don't know, hockey or ice skating, and there are other people around you, you actually might be worse than when there are other people around you than when you're by yourself. Another thing that can happen due to the mere presence effect is social loafing, which is the tendency of people to work less hard when part of a group than when they are solely responsible for their work. So if you worked in a group before, you might know that some people might not put as much effort into their assignments when they're part of a group than when they're working by themselves on the same work, on the same project. And the reason is because they don't feel as responsible for their work. There is a distribution of responsibility. Instead of knowing that that one individual is responsible for the whole project, for example, he knows that there are other 3 or 4 or 5 people in the group, and they will do the work, right? Why should he put in as much effort? And even though that's a problem, a lot of teachers and researchers do encourage group work. I myself usually teach team-based learning classes, and it's when usually the students work in groups. And yes, social loafing might be a problem, but there is a way to counter it, and is by using peer evaluations, for example. That way you hold individuals accountable for their contribution to their project or their work because they know they're going to be evaluated by their peers. Another element of social influence is conformity, bringing one's behavior into agreement of harmony with the norms or with the behavior of others in a group in the absence of any direct pressure. So you're acting or behaving in the same manner as others. However, there is no actual very direct, clear pressure for you to do that. So for example, the Asch experiment is a perfect example of conformity. So in this experiment, a participant would come in and was presented alongside with 6 other people, confederates, and there were actually actors. The participants thought that they were other participants, however, there weren't. The participant would they would all sit in a line, and the participant would sit last, usually. And each person would announce an answer to the question that is presented in front of them. So in this case, they were presented with the standard line, and they were asked which of the comparison lines is the same length as the standard line. And one of the comparisons would be 3, 3, 3. Another one says 3. You get to the actual participant, and he's like, huh? I can obviously, thinking in himself, in his head, of course, I can obviously see that number 2 is the correct one. Okay. But everybody else says 3. Okay, if everybody else is saying 3, they're probably right, because, okay, there are like 4 or 5 of them, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I need a new prescription to my glasses. Alright, he says 3 as well. And what they found was that the real student, the real participants, conformed 1/3 of the trials. So 33% of the time, they actually answered the wrong line just because other participants supposedly answered that wrong answer as well. I would like you to stop right now and check out the 2 YouTube clips that I posted. Exhibiting, one of them shows the Asch experiment, what actually happened, and the other one shows an excellent example of conformity, and it's actually pretty hilarious. So please stop right now and check it out. Alright, so another component is compliance, and compliance is the bending to the requests of a person who has little or no authority or other form of social power. So, for example, foot in the door effect is the tendency for a person who has first complied with a small request to be more likely later to fulfill a larger request. If you're interested in having your if you're trying to convince somebody, let's say you're a salesperson, and you want this person to move from T-Mobile to AT&T. How would you start to go about it? Well, you might ask them to do a small request. Hey, can you sign this petition? Or can you write your phone number to enter a lottery or something of that sort for free tablet? The people who will actually do that, they will comply with your small first request, will be more likely to actually fulfill your larger request that might be, hey, would you like to listen to me while I talk for half an hour trying to convince you to move from T-Mobile to AT&T? Another element is door in the face effect. I love these names, they're so fun. Which is the tendency for a person who has refused a major request to subsequently be more likely to comply with a minor request. So let's say you're going out of town and you have cats and plants and mail that needs to be taken care of while you're not there. So you go to your neighbor, you knock on their door, and without even remembering the name, you say, hey you, I'm going out of town for a year. Could you please watch my 3 cats and water my 15 plants and pick up my mail on a daily basis? You should watch your face, because you might get slammed door in the face, right? However, even after that, if you knock on the door and say, hey, so I know you said no to all that other stuff, but any chance you can pick up my mail for like a week while I'm out of town? That person, that neighbor, is more likely to say yes now after rejecting you with that major request than if they wouldn't have, if you didn't have requested them, if you haven't, requested that major request before. Obedience. It's the conformity to the demands of an authority. And the most famous study of obedience is the Milgram study. And it was a learning experiment. What would happen? A learner would come in. Sorry, a participant would come in and they would randomly, there was a Confederate. He didn't know it was a Confederate, so it was supposedly another participant. And one of them become the teacher, while the other one will become the learner. Always the actual participant was the teacher. This is the experimenter. What the teacher needed to do is to read from a list of words, and the learner needed to learn that list of words or something of that matter. Whenever the learner would not answer correctly, the teacher needed to shock the learner. And the shock would go from 15 to 450 volts, labeled from slight shock, extreme intensity shock, danger, severe shock, etc. One of them, I'm pretty sure, even had the pirates, the skeleton cross sign above it. What happened was the learner was actually aware of the experiment and he actually answered wrong in order for the teacher to shock him. He wasn't actually being shocked, but the teacher didn't know that. For all he knew, he's actually shocking the person sitting in the other room. So what happened was, at first, sure, it was not that big of a shock, 15 volts, 30 volts. With every wrong answer, the amount of shock given to the learner was increased. So soon the learner started to moan, complain of heart condition. At 150 volts, the learner actually said he doesn't want to continue and demands to be released. At 300 volts, he actually screamed and stopped responding altogether. The teachers, though, continued to give the shocks. What happened was 65% of people actually completely obeyed by going up to the last level of the 450 volt level. And no one stopped short of 300 volts. Seems crazy, right? So why did people obey? Well, it's possible that, you come into the lab and the actual study was conducted at Yale University. And Yale University, it has a big reputation. So you're like, all right, if it's happening in Yale University, right, maybe this is, important. The research lab, the researcher has a lab coat. It looks so professional, and we need to listen to doctors and follow the instructions. So maybe that's why people obeyed. A follow-up study actually reran this in a shady office building, and fewer people obeyed. But 48% of people still obeyed and still reached the last volts possible. Would you obey? Would you supposedly shock somebody else just because an authority told you to? The reason why it all started, Milgram was interested to understand why soldiers during World War II followed Hitler's instructions. Why would people actually hurt and kill other people just because of the authority? Coercion is being forced to change your beliefs or your behavior against your will. Brainwashing requires a captive audience, so you can turn off the TV if the advertisement is trying to change your beliefs or behavior, right? But for brainwashing to occur, you actually need to be captive. The person needs to feel complete helplessness in captivity, and it's easier for attitudinal and behavior change to occur. Cults are another example of coercion. A cult is a group of people who possess great devotion to some other person or cause, and they follow that person or cause almost without question. Cult members are usually victimized by their leaders in various ways. Alright, this was the lecture about social influence.